Rejection, few words carry such a sting. It feels like exile from belonging, a reminder of our deepest fear, that we are not wanted, not chosen, not enough. In that moment, it is tempting to shrink, to see ourselves through the narrow eyes of those who turned us away. But rejection is not a final judgment. It is an invitation, a call to transform. When the door closes, we are not meant to stand forever in front of it. We are meant to turn inward, to discover the fire that no one else can extinguish, and to rise as someone the world cannot afford to lose. Today, I want to guide you through 5 transformations that allow rejection to become the crucible of your becoming. Rejection is a wound that burns into the soul, a sharp reminder that the world does not always grant us what we long for. It comes suddenly, often without warning, a letter unopened but already known, a relationship ending in silence, a dream dismissed with a single word. In that instant the self trembles, the ego feels stripped, exposed, vulnerable to the gaze of others. We are left to ask, if they did not want me, what does that say about who I am? Yet hidden within the sting is something far greater than humiliation. Rejection is not only an end, it is a revelation. It does not simply take away, it unmasks. When someone turns from us, when the world closes a door, we are given a mirror. And in this mirror a question arises that is more powerful than any affirmation. Was I seeking this path for the sake of my soul, or for the comfort of validation? This is not a question asked lightly, for it pierces the illusions we build around ourselves. Much of what we pursue in life carries the secret hope that it will secure us against the abyss of insignificance. We wish to be chosen, to be approved, to be told that we matter. Yet when rejection removes the applause, when the gaze of approval is withdrawn, we are forced to look beneath the surface and discover what remains when nothing external affirms us. The artist who faces the rejection of a publisher may feel the sting as a judgment of worth, but if, in the silence that follows, the artist still feels compelled to create, if the urge to paint, to write, to compose remains as steady as before, then a truth is revealed. The calling was never about applause. It was about expression, about the soul's need to manifest what lives within. Rejection then becomes the sacred test. It is the fire that burns away false motives and exposes the gold of genuine desire. It teaches us to separate the hunger of the ego from the longing of the soul. There is a deeper lesson here, to ask not, why did they not want me? But instead, what does this pain reveal about what I truly want? This shift in questioning is crucial, for it moves us away from dependence on the world's recognition and into communion with our own inner compass. When we define our worth by the acceptance of others, we live a borrowed life, forever fragile, forever vulnerable to the changing winds of opinion. But when rejection strips that away, we are left with the one thing that cannot be taken, the authentic voice of our own being. Consider how often rejection has led individuals to discover their truer paths. A man denied entry into a career he believed essential to his future may, in despair, turn elsewhere, only to find a calling that resonates far more deeply than his first ambition ever did. A woman abandoned in love, devastated by the collapse of a relationship, may finally be forced to encounter herself, her strength, her creativity, her independence, discovering qualities that had been overshadowed by her reliance on another's presence. Rejection, though painful, becomes the great revealer, the force that clears illusions and confronts us with the raw truth of who we are and what we truly seek. We live in a world where rejection is often seen as failure. But it is not failure, it is feedback. It tells us either that the path we were pursuing was not aligned with our deepest values, or that we are not yet ready to embody it fully. It strips us of pretenses and insists that we face what truly matters. In this way, rejection becomes less of an enemy and more of an initiation. Like an ancient rite, it pushes us into the wilderness where no external voice can guide us, and there we must learn to hear the whisper of our own soul. This is why so many who are remembered by history endured profound rejection before they were ever celebrated. The scientist ridiculed for a theory that later reshaped understanding, the writer whose manuscript was turned away countless times before it became a classic, the visionary dismissed by contemporaries who could not see what he saw. Each of them faced the wound of dismissal. And yet in that very wound they found the strength to clarify their vision, to endure, to refine their purpose. Rejection did not define them, it refined them. And so the challenge for each of us when rejection comes is not to sink into bitterness, but to allow the pain to carve us deeper. To sit with it long enough to ask, what is it that I truly value here? Was I chasing applause, or was I chasing meaning? Do I desire the approval of others more than the authenticity of my own becoming? These questions are not easy. They strip us bare, but they are the questions that transform rejection into revelation. There is a paradox at the heart of rejection. Though it appears to diminish us, it can actually enlarge us, if we allow it. For in the act of losing what we thought we needed, we may discover the power of needing less. In the absence of being chosen, we may discover the strength of choosing ourselves. When no one else opens the door, we may realize that the true threshold was always within. The compass for our next chapter lies hidden in the very pain we wish to escape. Pain points us toward value, just as hunger points us toward food. If rejection hurts, it is because something in us has been touched that matters deeply. To follow that pain with honesty is to uncover the contours of our most authentic desires. It may not be the approval of that particular person, or the acceptance into that specific role, but something more enduring, the longing to create, to connect, to live in alignment with truth. That is the compass rejection places in our hands, if only we dare to hold it. Therefore, do not despise rejection. Do not rush to cover it with distractions or bury it beneath resentment. Sit with it. Listen to it. Let it tell you what you truly long for in that revelation lies the seed of transformation. Rejection is not merely the closing of a door. It is the opening of an inner chamber, a place where the soul speaks more clearly than it ever could in the noise of constant approval. If we are brave enough to hear that voice, rejection becomes less of a wound and more of a guide. It shows us that the worth of our life is not measured by the eyes that see us or the hands that applaud us, but by the fire that continues to burn within, even when the world looks away. And in that fire, we find not just consolation, but power. The kind of power that no rejection can ever take away. Rejection is so often misinterpreted as a verdict, a declaration that we are unworthy, inadequate, or mistaken. Yet, to see rejection in such terms is to misunderstand its deeper meaning. Rejection, in truth, is proof that we are in motion, that we have dared to step beyond the circle of safety into the unpredictable terrain of life. A person who never risks, who never extends themselves, who never reaches toward the unknown, will also never feel the sting of rejection. But in this avoidance, they will also never feel the vitality of being truly alive. It is only those who risk the no who open themselves to the possibility of a greater yes. There is a hidden comfort in stagnation. If I never apply for the role, I cannot be turned away. If I never confess my feelings, I cannot be rejected. If I never attempt to share my art, no critic will wound me with dismissal. Yet what kind of life is this? It is a life of perpetual waiting, a life lived behind walls where the soul slowly suffocates in the absence of risk. To be alive is to encounter resistance. To move towards something greater is to meet the possibility of denial. It cannot be otherwise, for every act of creation, every act of courage, invites both affirmation and refusal. Think of the countless failures that paved the way for the light bulb, a symbol that has become nearly synonymous with human ingenuity. Thomas Edison's thousands of failed attempts were not meaningless defeats. Each one was evidence that he was walking, not standing still. Each rejection of his prototypes was proof of his persistence, his refusal to surrender to the false comfort of safety. Had he sought a path without rejection, the world would have remained in darkness. His story reminds us that rejection is not the mark of inadequacy, but the price of genuine pursuit. And this truth extends beyond invention, beyond the laboratory or the workshop. It echoes in every corner of human striving. The writer whose manuscript is returned unopened, the entrepreneur whose idea is dismissed by investors, the young person whose heart is refused in love. Each of these experiences carries within it the bitter taste of rejection. But beneath that bitterness lies a hidden sweetness, for it confirms that one has dared. To hear no is to know that you are courageous enough to ask, bold enough to step forward, alive enough to try. We must learn to see rejection not as an indictment, but as a signpost on the road of movement. Every no is evidence that you are engaged in the struggle of life, that you are contending with forces beyond yourself, that you are awake to possibility. To live without rejection would mean you have hidden your gifts, concealed your desires, and silenced your voice. Such a life may appear smooth on the surface, but beneath it lies despair, the despair of never having truly lived. There is an archetype at work here, the figure of the wanderer who leaves the safety of the village to seek new lands. Along the way, the wanderer encounters obstacles, denials, and closed doors. Each rejection is not the end of the journey, but part of its texture. The very fact that the wanderer faces resistance confirms that the path is real, that it leads somewhere unknown. If there were no obstacles, no risks, the journey would not be one of growth, but of stagnation. Likewise, in our own lives, rejection tells us we are moving along a path worth traveling. Many people, when they are rejected, retreat back into safety. They say, "I will not try again. I will not expose myself to another wound." But in doing so, they mistake rejection for failure. Failure is the end of pursuit, the giving up of movement, the surrender of vitality. Rejection, on the other hand, is part of pursuit. It is a mark of engagement. It says, "I have stepped into the arena." And what greater tragedy is there than to watch life pass from the stands, never daring to step into the dust and sweat of the arena, where the risk is high, but where the possibility of transformation also resides. We can see this truth in love. To offer our heart is one of the greatest risks, for rejection in this realm cuts deeply. To hear no when one longs for yes can feel unbearable, yet what is the alternative? To never risk love is to live half, dead to keep the heart encased in stone. Rejection in love hurts, but it is also proof that one has lived courageously, that one has dared to reach beyond oneself into the mystery of another soul. It is not failure to be turned away. Failure would be to never love at all. The same applies to our calling, our creative impulses, our ambitions. Every great endeavor requires us to risk rejection. Musicians play songs no one wants to hear at first. Actors face endless auditions that lead nowhere. Entrepreneurs experience rejection after rejection before one door finally opens. And yet, what unites those who ultimately leave a mark on the world is their recognition that rejection was not failure, It was feedback, proof of movement, part of the necessary rhythm of progress. To reframe rejection in this way is to transform its power over us. Instead of collapsing under its weight, we learn to see it as a signal that we are on the path. Every no we encounter becomes a sign that we are alive, that we are participants in the unfolding drama of life. Each rejection is a reminder that we have not chosen the stagnant waters of comfort, but the flowing river of risk. This is not to deny the pain. Rejection stings because it touches the most vulnerable parts of us, the longing to be seen, the desire to belong, the hope to be affirmed. But when we understand that rejection is not evidence of our inadequacy, but of our movement, we begin to carry that pain differently. We wear it not as a scar of shame, but as a badge of courage. So when the world tells you no, resist the temptation to retreat. Let the rejection remind you that you are alive, that you are walking, that you are daring. The no is not the end of the road. It is the sign that there is a road and that you are already on it. Each rejection is a companion on the journey, a shadow that proves the presence of light. To embrace this truth is to embrace life itself, with all its risks, all its wounds, and all its profound possibilities. Rejection carries within it a secret message, though at first it only feels like a wound. The message is this: the self you brought to this moment is not yet the self that is required for what you seek. Life, in its unyielding wisdom, says not this version of you, and though we experience this as loss, it is often a disguised invitation to become something more. The pain is real, but beneath the sting is an insistence that we have not yet reached the depth of our potential, that a stronger, wiser, more complete self is waiting to be born through the very rejection that now torments us. Think of how the end of a relationship can shake the ground beneath a person's feet. The familiar presence, the comfort of belonging, the illusion of certainty, all are suddenly removed. In the silence that follows, loneliness presses in, and the mind torments itself with questions of worth. Yet if one dares to remain with this discomfort rather than flee into distractions, something remarkable begins to stir. The person is confronted with themselves, not the self reflected in another's eyes, but the self that remains when no one is there to affirm them. In that confrontation, the seeds of self-respect are planted. One learns to stand without leaning, to speak without echo, to live without constant reassurance. The end of the relationship, devastating though it may be, becomes the crucible in which resilience and authenticity are forged. The same truth emerges in the realm of work. To be turned away from an opportunity feels like a verdict, a judgment that we are not enough. But often, rejection is not the final word. It is a call to preparation. It presses us to acquire the skills, the strength, and the clarity that were not yet present. A closed door, rather than declaring us unworthy, insists that we are unfinished. And so, like metal in fire, we are forced to endure the refining heat, to sharpen our abilities, to grow into someone who cannot be denied the next time. Many people who have achieved mastery in their fields will point back to moments of rejection as the turning points, the moments that forced them out of complacency and into transformation. There is an archetypal image that speaks to this truth, the snake shedding its skin. The old skin becomes too tight, too rigid, too suffocating for the growing life within. The shedding process is uncomfortable, even dangerous, but without it, the snake cannot continue to live. In the same way, rejection strips away the old identity, the comfortable version of ourselves that we believed was sufficient. It exposes the inadequacy of what we have outgrown and compels us to emerge in a new form. It is not destruction, it is renewal, yet renewal requires loss, and loss always feels like pain. The danger is that we misinterpret rejection as evidence of our unworthiness, rather than as a summons to growth. We may sink into despair, concluding that we are not capable, not lovable, not enough. But this is only half the truth, and the darker half at that. The fuller truth is that we are not yet who we must become. Rejection is the boundary between the self we are and the self we are called to be. To stop at rejection is to abandon the journey. To step through it is to encounter transformation. We see this pattern everywhere. The young athlete cut from the team, who chooses either to give up or to train harder than ever before, returning with strength that astonishes even the coach. The student denied admission to the program of their dreams, who either resigns in bitterness or redirects their energy into building a path even more fitting for their talents. The individual overlooked for promotion, who either shrinks in resentment or embraces the challenge to expand their capabilities until they cannot be ignored. In each case, the rejection is not an end, but a threshold. What determines the outcome is not the no itself, but the response it evokes. To face rejection as transformation, one must ask the courageous question, what must I become so that this rejection is not possible again? This is not a question of vanity, not a plea for approval at any cost. It is a question of growth. It shifts the focus from the wound inflicted by others to the work demanded within ourselves. Instead of blaming the world for its refusal, we take responsibility for our evolution. We ask what skills must be learned, what strength must be developed, what shadow within us must be faced. This question turns pain into power, rejection into renewal. There is a paradox in this process. Often, the self that emerges after rejection is not the self we thought we were striving toward, but someone altogether deeper, more authentic, and more complete. The end of a relationship may force us to discover joy within solitude, teaching us that our value does not depend on another's presence. The loss of a job may push us into an entirely new field, one that resonates far more with our talents than the old path ever did. The dismissal of our art may lead us to refine it until it carries a depth of truth that could never have been reached without the sting of dismissal. Rejection does not merely strengthen the old self, it gives birth to a new one. If we view life only through the lens of comfort, we will forever resist rejection. But if we see life as a process of becoming, then rejection reveals itself as one of its most essential instruments. Comfort protects us, but it also confines us. Pain disrupts us, but it also transforms us. Rejection is the moment when the shell cracks, when the old form is broken, when the possibility of rebirth opens. It is not a punishment, it is the necessary violence of transformation. And so, when rejection comes, though it may cut into the deepest parts of our being, we must resist the temptation to see it as the end. We must dare to ask, what new self is being called forth through this loss? What deeper strength is life demanding of me? What must I shed in order to grow? The answers to these questions are never easy, and they are often painful, but they are also liberating. They free us from the illusions that kept us small and lead us toward the fullness of who we are meant to become. Rejection, then, is not the enemy. It is the midwife of transformation. It strips away the version of ourselves that is too narrow, too fragile, too incomplete, and demands that we step into a self we have not yet dared to embody. It does not say, "You are unworthy." It says, "You are not finished." And in that recognition, the wound of rejection becomes the doorway to renewal, the threshold where we meet not only our pain, but our becoming. When we face rejection, our first impulse is often to cling to what has slipped from our grasp, as though the door that closed was the only door that ever existed. We mourn not only the loss of the opportunity itself, but the collapse of the future we imagined would unfold through it. It feels as if the ground has been taken from beneath our feet, and with it the very structure of our identity. Yet what we so often fail to see in the immediacy of the wound is that rejection is not only a loss, it is also a clearing. It sweeps away what no longer serves us, what has become too narrow, too confining, or too ill-fitting for our deeper purpose. What we mistake as subtraction may in truth be redirection, a path away from the familiar, but towards something that will ultimately call forth a more authentic alignment. This truth becomes evident in the stories of countless lives that only revealed their true path after rejection had shattered the illusions of the old one. Consider the example of Oprah Winfrey, whose early career seemed to falter when she was dismissed from a television job and told she was unfit for the medium. In that moment, she must have felt humiliation and despair, for her ambition was seemingly crushed. Yet it was precisely that rejection that forced her to find her own unique expression in a way that eventually reshaped television itself. The path she had once clung to was not the one her soul was destined for. What looked like failure was in fact a reorientation, a clearing of space for the extraordinary work she was meant to bring into the world. This pattern repeats across history and in the quiet narratives of ordinary lives. An individual who is turned away from the university they dreamed of attending later discovers a program or mentor in an unexpected place that nurtures their unique gifts more profoundly than the original choice ever could have. Another who is denied a particular job discovers, sometimes by accident, a different vocation that awakens a deeper sense of purpose. A person whose love is rejected may find the heartbreak unbearable at first, only to realize later that the loss opened the possibility of a relationship far more aligned with their truest self. Again and again, rejection appears as an ending, yet in time it reveals itself as a beginning. The difficulty is that we rarely perceive the redirection in the moment. Our minds cling desperately to the path we thought was ours, because to let go feels like annihilation. We believe we know what our lives should look like, and when that image is torn from us, we fall into despair. But life has a wisdom that often exceeds our conscious plans. It sees further than we do. It clears paths we would never dare to clear ourselves. In this sense, rejection is often the universe's way of guiding us to a destiny too vast to fit inside the smaller dreams we had constructed for ourselves. Think of a river that flows freely until it meets a great stone blocking its course. At first, the water seems stopped, denied its passage, but slowly, with time, it finds another channel, carving new ground, often leading to a richer and wider basin. Rejection is like that stone. It appears to halt us, to deny us, but in truth it forces us into new terrain. And though at first we resist, clinging to the blocked passage, eventually we find that the redirection has led us somewhere more expansive than we could have ever imagined. The task, then, is not to curse the stone, nor to forever stare at the closed door, but to ask instead, what other path is opening that I have not yet seen? What horizon lies beyond the disappointment of this moment? What life is seeking to emerge that my limited vision could not yet perceive? These are questions that require courage, for they ask us to surrender our attachment to control, to trust that what is unfolding is not punishment but guidance. This trust is not blind optimism. It is rooted in the recognition that life is a process of becoming, and that becoming rarely follows the straight line we imagine. If we reflect upon our own journeys, we often see that the most significant shifts in our lives were not the ones we planned, but the ones forced upon us by circumstance, by loss, by rejection. We see that the times we thought were endings were, in truth, the thresholds to deeper authenticity. To embrace this perspective is to live with greater openness, to see rejection not as a verdict, but as an invitation to realignment. There is a danger in refusing this invitation. When rejection comes and we cling obsessively to the path that has closed, we risk remaining stuck in bitterness, unable to perceive the new path that is waiting. We may spend years mourning a door that will never reopen, all the while ignoring the window that has quietly opened behind us. To resist rejection is to resist growth. To embrace it is to trust that life knows how to lead us toward the places we most belong, even when we do not yet see them clearly. Examples abound in our collective story. Writers whose early works were refused by every publisher, only to later produce masterpieces that would never have been written without the fire of rejection shaping their craft. Leaders who were dismissed or overlooked, only to emerge later with a vision that could only have been born through suffering. Lovers whose heartbreaks forced them into solitude, where they met the deeper self that would later make true intimacy possible. Again and again, rejection is not an end but a turning, a redirection of energy toward a destiny more profound than the one we imagined. The human spirit resists uncertainty. We long for the comfort of predictability, for the assurance that our efforts will yield the outcomes we envision. But rejection teaches us that life does not always follow our script. It disrupts the narrative we had written and replaces it with one we could not foresee. Though painful, this disruption is often a mercy. It frees us from the prison of our limited imagination and expands the field of possibility. It insists that we grow, that we move, that we allow ourselves to be led to horizons we did not know existed. So when rejection comes, though the wound may feel unbearable, we are invited to hold to the deeper truth, that life is not subtracting but rerouting, that what feels like loss may, in time, reveal itself as a gift, that the closed door may be the very thing that clears the way for a larger destiny. To trust this is not easy. It requires patience, humility, and faith in a wisdom greater than our own. Yet, if we can trust it, if we can endure the pain without despair, we may one day look back and see that what we thought was the end was, in truth, the beginning of a path we could never have imagined, a path that led us closer to the fullness of who we were meant to be. There comes a point in the journey through rejection when the pain of loss, the sting of no, and the bitterness of being turned away no longer dominate the soul. Beyond the initial wound, beyond the grief, lies a deeper transformation. It is the moment when we realize that the ultimate task is not to persuade others of our worth, not to spend our lives begging to be chosen, but to cultivate ourselves so fully, so deeply, so authentically, that our presence itself becomes irreplaceable. The true victory after rejection is not in winning back what was lost, nor in proving wrong those who dismissed us. The true victory is to become someone the world cannot afford to lose. This transformation begins with a shift of focus. Rejection tempts us to stare endlessly at those who have turned away, to obsess over the closed door, to measure our worth through the eyes that did not see us. But this is a trap. To be consumed by those who rejected us is to hand them power over our becoming. The real work lies not in convincing them, but in becoming so radiant, so rooted in purpose, that the absence of our light leaves a void. When you devote yourself to becoming indispensable in integrity, in skill, in compassion, you no longer need to beg for belonging. You embody it. History offers us luminous examples of this truth. Nelson Mandela endured 27 years in prison, branded as a threat, cast out by the very system he longed to heal. Many would have emerged embittered, broken, or consumed by the injustice. Yet Mandela emerged not as a man diminished, but as a man enlarged. His suffering had deepened him, shaped him, tempered him like steel in fire. He did not return to his people begging for acceptance, but as someone whose very presence redefined what leadership meant. His existence itself became a force history could not ignore. That is the mark of one who has become indispensable. But this transformation is not reserved for leaders of nations. It belongs to each of us. It is the quiet teacher who, though never celebrated by the world, cultivates such wisdom and compassion that their absence leaves an aching emptiness in the lives of their students. It is the parent who, in steadfast love, creates a home where children feel rooted in safety and possibility, becoming a presence so foundational that it shapes generations. It is the friend who, through loyalty and truth, becomes a pillar others lean on, whose absence would collapse an entire circle of lives. Indispensability is not about fame or applause. It is about depth. It is about living in such alignment with one's values, one's gifts, and one's humanity that your being itself is a blessing the world cannot dismiss. To arrive here requires a decision to no longer chase approval, but to pursue mastery. When you chase approval, you give away your power. You bend yourself to fit the preferences of others. You dilute your truth. You shrink your radiance to avoid disapproval. But when you pursue mastery, whether in your craft, in your character, in your relationship, you no longer beg for attention. You command it through the undeniable force of who you have become. Approval becomes irrelevant, for your presence carries its own authority. This path is not easy. It demands discipline, for the work of becoming indispensable is often unseen, uncelebrated, and slow. It demands integrity, for without it any brilliance collapses into emptiness. It demands authenticity, for the world does not need more copies of others. It needs the unrepeatable expression of you. To walk this path is to embrace solitude, to endure misunderstanding, to labor in the shadows long before the light of recognition arrives. But it is also to live in such a way that, over time, your existence itself becomes a gift too essential to overlook. There is also a paradox here. When you reach the place of becoming someone the world cannot afford to lose, it is no longer about the world at all. It is not about their validation or their applause. It is about the truth you carry, the life you embody, the light you refuse to dim. It is about the fierce joy of being wholly alive, wholly present, wholly yourself. At this point, rejection loses its sting, for you no longer depend on external acceptance to justify your existence. You carry within you a presence that cannot be taken, cannot be denied. The world today is filled with voices clamoring for attention, for recognition, for affirmation. Many seek to be seen, but few seek to be indispensable. To be seen is fleeting, but to be indispensable is enduring. To be seen depends on the eyes of others, but to be indispensable depends on the depth of your becoming. This is why so many who once seemed invisible, working quietly, laboring faithfully, remaining authentic, suddenly emerge as figures whose absence is unimaginable. Their worth was not created by recognition, it was revealed by it. And so, when rejection wounds you, when you feel cast aside, the question to carry is not, how do I make them want me, but rather, what kind of person must I become so that my presence is undeniable, so that my light cannot be extinguished, so that my absence would leave the world poorer. This question does not diminish the pain of rejection, but it transforms it. It takes the energy of loss and channels it into growth, into purpose, into mastery. This is not about arrogance or self-importance. To become someone the world cannot afford to lose is not to inflate the ego but to serve the soul. It is to cultivate such depth of compassion, such strength of character, such authenticity of expression that you are not easily replaced. It is to live in a way that your life radiates meaning, not because of what others give you, but because of what you give to life itself. In every rejection lies this possibility. The person who walked away, the opportunity that disappeared, the gate that closed, they did not define your worth. They merely created the space for you to step into a larger version of yourself. You may not see it now. You may still feel the ache of absence. But if you dedicate yourself to growth, to compassion, to mastery, there will come a time when you realize that you no longer beg for belonging. You are belonging, you no longer chase to be chosen, you are already chosen by the very life that breathes through you, and this is the deepest transformation rejection can bring, to turn your gaze inward, to ignite the fire that no external yes or no can control, and to live in such a way that your existence itself becomes a presence the world cannot afford to lose. Rejection will come again. It is part of life's rhythm. But now, when it comes, you will not crumble. You will remember, it clarifies your values, it proves your courage, it demands your evolution, it redirects you to what is greater, and ultimately, it invites you to become someone whose light cannot be dimmed. So, after rejection, do not shrink, rise, become what no one wants to lose.